everybody, how are you doing? Host Mr. Guys. I am here with Rachel, Richard, and my co-host. Thank you so much. Carla, how are you doing tonight?
Happy to be here. Really excited to talk to Rachel and Richard about our topic for the evening, which are NFTs. So before we get into it, I'll let Rachel and Richard say hi.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to PyxelChat. We're happy to be here to talk a little bit about NFTs, what they are, and what they're doing.
Awesome, cool. Now, I did want to ask Richard, what do you have for dinner? Before we even get any further.
I made an awesome flank steak. It was marinated in a homemade marinade for 2 days.
2 whole days, damn. So speaking of things that have been going on for at least 2 whole days, we're going to be talking about NFTs, right? So I have to ask here, Richard, that's the smoothest transition you've ever heard, by the way, everyone at home. So what is an NFT composed of, Richard? Like, can you building block this for me? I need to have a better understanding. What are NFTs?
Yeah, I mean, let's first ask what an NFT actually is. A non-fungible token. What that is a token that cannot be directly compared specifically to another one of a similar type. Now, let's break this down. So let's take a $1 bill. And a $1 bill has some different aspects to it. It's got potentially some random markings from being in human hands or whatever. But what it more specifically has that makes it technically also non-fungible is a serial number and then some other specific letter markings around the bill that would not be identical to another one. And so the government and law enforcement use this when there are thefts. They will mark what serial number ranges they think the bills had when they were stolen. And then they will have banks try to figure out when those come in and try to track where those went and all that kind of stuff. And so NFTs are very similar to this in the fact that they have a very specific, unique set of data to them that makes them them and nothing else. And it's impossible to fake that as a different unit.
Right. I guess just to elaborate more, I think most commonly when I think of an NFT, I think of like a PNG, you know, I see those monkeys all over the internet. Rachel, can you elaborate more on like what else can be an NFT other than just some art?
Yeah, so NFTs are really interesting because it's a technology that isn't being very well utilized. Because really what it does is NFT is a set of data that is different from any other piece of data. Right. So if you have, in the case of like the dollars and the serial numbers, you're never going to have $2 with the same serial numbers. And that is something that we see a lot in the sense of like using this to make or signify different art pieces and like a series and things like that. But really, we have the need for unique data sets in a ton of different parts of our lives. So like, if you think about a contract could be an NFT, and that would be important because it would be the only one like it, and it would then signify like that one specific agreement between you and another person. Or, you know, an NFT could also be something like a receipt, something that shows an exchange, like, you know, where you record this data and you want to be able to reference it later. The thing that's neat about it is that it is a way of taking this snapshot and then storing that in a place where it isn't going to be corrupted, it can't be changed, can't be altered, and that allows us to have a level of security in whatever that content is. So it definitely has purpose outside of art as well.
Right.
Oh, that's super cool. So, you know, I'm a dummy. I need a little bit of clarification here. I need a little bit more. Some practical use applications. I heard receipt. Do you think you can think of a couple of use cases for NFTs, specifically in that regard as well? Like, what if I have a receipt for something, it can't be changed. Everyone knows it's stored on the blockchain, stuff like that.
Yeah, let's take an example that is actually being in use today in some small instances. Some people are using these for entry into events. And So this is a good example because if you were to go to the movies, your ticket stub is probably pretty fungible. If I handed it to another person, the person's not really looking at it except for that seat number. And so you technically have a piece of paper that whether or not the seat number shows, it is pretty much the same thing. But with an NFT, you have the security of how it is stored, and obviously it depends on what blockchain it's on and how the blockchain works, but let's take an Ethereum NFT. You have all of the security of proof of work currently that ensures that your NFT is not possible to be duplicated and that you are the only owner of that.
Righteous, cool. So whatever the associated address that has that NFT, they're the true owner, right?
Yeah, you can essentially prove I both have this thing and I own it by just verifying, yep, that's my address. And there's a few different ways you can prove that is your address.
So let's boil this down, Richard. What are some things that NFTs provide that you can't find anywhere else?
I would say it's security and truth. With an NFT that you have a one-of-a-kind unit that is specifically true, that you can hold and own. And so if we talk about how a lot of people use this in today's world, they may not think about it in the way that they potentially should think about it, but a lot of people are using this for art. And if we look at the art example, you could have a forged Picasso. You could have a forged Rembrandt. Experts could look at this thing and say, yeah, it's real. One expert could look at it and say, no, that's fake. Here's why. And they could argue about it. But with an NFT, there's no chance for that question to exist. And so if you were able to have a piece of art connected to an NFT like that, then it would be impossible for any expert to deny the validity of it.
Yeah, I think that a really key phrase is provably true. Where in, the example that we're using right now with art, there isn't really a lot of proof. We look at different pieces and we try to discern the proof from that, right? We look at this and we go, okay, well, this particular kind of paint was used and this brushstroke was used and this style was used, and all of these things are true to, this Picasso. However, it's not a provably true thing. There are ridiculously convincing forgeries. And really all we have in order to tell whether or not something is a forgery is human discretion and human senses, and, we have technology to help support that as far as scanning this for, seeing when it was painted or things like that. But still in the end, it's a person who's making the call. And that's not technically provably true. It's something that can be tricked. It's something that can be faked. And so that's kind of where that difference is.
Yeah, something on the blockchain can't really lie, right?
Exactly.
There's a number, there's a block, it happens, bada bing, bada boom, right?
Yep. It makes things simple and easy to prove.
Right, you're not miscounting brush strokes
right.
over on a Picasso painting, right? Okay,
or relying on one expert's testimony that argues with another expert.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is something I think about is, if let's say apes, right? Like ape photos. There's the meme going on, why don't I just right click and save these? But it's really not just the artwork, right? It's the contract associated with that artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You could talk about the same thing with a lithograph. So a lithograph would be, an identical copy that would be numbered to some number. And if you had a lithograph, like number 1 lithograph of some painting that was specifically commissioned, and you could prove that it was true, then it would have some specific value. Mm-hmm. And so there could be copies of these things. There are very specific, unique pieces of art that go along with it, or it could be identical. But the very underlying foundation of this thing is that it is unique. That's the non-fungible piece. Otherwise, they would just be tokens.
Right on. So let's say we want NFTs. We would like them. We want to get an ape. We want to get something else. We want pretty pictures and the contracts associated with them, right? For whatever reason, benefit, etc. Could you name some of the pros and cons of some of the different networks I've seen? I've seen like Ethereum, Solana. Could you go over some of those?
Sure. Yeah. So Ethereum is probably the most well known. Solana is kind of like this up and coming place for NFTs. People have probably also heard of crypto.com. They do a ton of advertising. Some people don't know that they have a chain. Most people don't know that crypto.com's chain isn't CRO. And so there's just kind of like these new providers coming out in the world that you can store data on. And this data could be NFTs, could be tokens, could be words, whatever. And so essentially there are specific differences in how these networks work, kind of what their security models are. Currently, Ethereum is going through a process of switching away from a more secure model to a less secure model, from proof of work to proof of stake. But it is still probably the most decentralized, most secure, but also stupidly expensive and painfully slow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, generally when we're looking at the pros and cons of these different networks, there's a few different things that we take into account. It's the price of transaction, right? Because there are networks where you have to pay, in general, you have to pay a fee to transact. It's just a matter of whether or not that fee is negligible, something that's like, a fraction of a cent or a few cents, or if it's very noticeable. Sometimes on the Ethereum network, those fees can be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. I think that the highest I've ever seen fees for a transaction go was $6,000. And that happens because of network traffic. So basically when things are really busy and there are a lot of transactions happening, they're more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, imagine Starbucks trying to sell cups of coffee via NFTs. You would spend more on your NFT just to mint it on Ethereum than you would on your espresso that is also pretty expensive in the first place.
Yep.
So it's kind of a silly thing to do, and that's why Ethereum is trying to fix some of their historical mistakes and fix some of their fees and switching to a less secure model by going to proof of stake. They're saying that they're going to have faster transactions and that this gas problem is going to go away, and we'll see. It's a big unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is outside of the scope of this, but even if they change, right, because of how that's held on the execution layer, they're still going to have higher gas prices than other proof of stake networks. Isn't that right, Richard?
I'd love to do a podcast just on the speculation of this.
Let's do speculation.
Yeah, I think that they're in for some growing pains, for sure. They've had them for years. Their transactions, I think they're around 11 per second on average or so. And, if you're looking to do a lot of transactions, you're going to have to wait. Now, speaking of waiting on chain and like these transaction speeds and stuff, we're trying to do an informational podcast here. If you went to do a transaction on Ethereum and it did take a couple hours or something like that, which, some cases that does happen. Most of the time it's within 1 to 15, 30 minutes or something like that. Then as long as it actually occurs and happens, then you're secure and safe and your transaction exists and it doesn't ever go away and the history is there. And so the speed, even though Ethereum is attempting to move faster, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is just making sure that they have a usable product that works, that is secure, and that isn't too expensive to use.
Right. I guess kind of a follow-up question with that. I've heard a lot about the energy consumption of NFTs on the ETH network. Is that something to worry about? Are there any benefits to alternatives?
No, that's a great question. I would also love to do another podcast specifically just on energy use, security, proof of work, that kind of thing. I don't want to speak too long about this because I think that we should definitely make it into at least one full episode. But essentially, there is a lot of misinformation going out around about what energy use means in the context of blockchain. In the context of blockchain, in its infancy and its growth, security is paramount, and you hear all kinds of hacks and whatnot. Proof of work is the most secure method. And the amount of electricity that a monetary instrument like Bitcoin uses is on the scale of countries. Last I looked, I think it was approximately the amount of energy that Chile uses a year or something like that. It's a lot. But what that means is it means that someone couldn't try to break their security by competing with the network, because they would have to come up with both the amount of equipment that all the people have that run Bitcoin mining, but also the amount of power and infrastructure needed to accomplish that, and which wouldn't be possible. Whereas proof of stake is purely just having a monetary unit. And so if you had a few very wealthy people get together, then they could have certain monetary values to bring together to eventually coordinate this attack that maybe you wouldn't know was going to happen until it did. Whereas I'm sure someone would notice if some government entity tried to create a space big enough to handle the amount of electronics that would need to go in there, and then draw on multiple nuclear power plants in order to compete. So to wrap it up, proof of work is definitely the more secure option. A lot of these chains are investigating. Most of the power that I've seen in studies has been hydroelectric or some sort of very cheap energy source. And the reason why is that as a miner, you have a profit and a loss. Your loss is both in equipment, and your heaviest loss is in electricity. And so you are looking for the cheapest, greenest energy you can get your hands on, because that's what makes sense to you economically.
Right. And I think I would love to, dive into more about mining and all of that in a future podcast as well. But I appreciate your insight on it.
Yeah.
Just as a quick summary, there's always going to be a trade-off between security and energy consumption, right, Richard? If we're talking about proof of stake and proof of work.
Yeah, exactly. And if you were to compare it to, how much does it take to move a dollar, in America or something like that, I'd be willing to bet that the energy consumption there is astronomically more expensive than the energy usage of Bitcoin. There's a lot of studies too we could bring up in the next podcast.
Looking forward to that one. We'll call out all those numbers. So I gotta ask, how is data stored for these NFTs? And that might sound like an ignorant question on the surface, but I'm just wondering, there's NFTs, which are the associated tokens, right? But if I'm looking at these PNGs, where is it that those are stored? What's going on with that, for example?
Well, let's also, just for beginner's sake, reference what a PNG is. A PNG is a portable image file. It's like a JPEG, or it's a picture that's stored in a digital format. NFTs can pretty much have any type of data. Could be textual, could be images, whatever. And typically, this data is actually not stored on a blockchain. So most of this data is stored on a service called the Interplanetary File System. And this is not a blockchain. This data can go down, does go down. We see this in the products that we're building, where we are tracking which images go away and if or when they come back.
Huh. Okay, so even if you still own the contract to something, sometimes you won't be able to see it if whatever's hosting it goes down?
Yep. Yeah, and you can definitely host NFTs not on IPFS. IPFS is, has a little bit of a bad reputation for a myriad of reasons, but one of them is especially speed. And if you don't have your own node or have that data available, or the data's old, or the node goes down, then that can definitely just disappear. That doesn't mean it's gone or your NFT doesn't have the value that it did. It just means that the metadata, or the data that accompanies that NFT, is no longer visible to humans.
Wow. So what, maybe Rachel, do you want to elaborate? So what exactly are you buying with an NFT? We talked a little bit earlier about, obviously Richard just mentioned metadata, all the data that comes accompanying an NFT, and we talked about receipts, but, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so it's a complex question, because the question that you're asking is sort of like there's the simple question of like, what are you buying? You're buying a true set of data. But then the further question of that is like, what can we do with it? And that's somewhat limited by the tools that you have available. So what we see this a lot with is like using art as a collectible and using that collectible item as a way to hopefully invest and be able to turn a profit. That's usually what we see NFTs used for. And when you're buying it, you're buying that one collectible piece that may or may not increase in value. Once there are more systems and there's better technology that really looks into what NFTs can be used for, that looks at this idea of having a unique trackable set of data that isn't going to be corrupted, that's provably true, then you're going to see that NFTs have a much broader use case than what we see right now. But when you're buying an NFT, you're really buying that provably true set of data. You're saying that the thing that I own is exactly this, nothing more, nothing less. It's not going to change. Nobody can say that it's done something it hasn't done. It is exactly what it is. So I would say, like, arguably, when you're buying an NFT, you're buying the truth of whatever it is that you're getting. And that's kind of like the heart of it.
And to add to that, the serial number that we talked before that's on the dollar bill, I mean, that's really essentially the piece of data that you have. Mm-hmm. You have associated with something you own, either your wallet or a contract that you have power over, the ownership of an NFT or the ability to use it in some way.
Righteous. So we've been talking about NFTs, right? And I gotta ask, there's different types of NFT tokens, right?
Yeah.
Could you let us know a little bit about those?
Yeah,
what's going on then?
Sure. There's an ERC 721. There's an ERC 1155. There's also a couple other side standards, but those are the most common. And the key differences really are that you can have multiple operations on a single transaction with an 1155 and only one operation on a 721. So 1155 is kind of like a newer standard. It can have things like decimal values of a token. So you can have like the semi-fungible unit where you could have 2.0 of the thing or whatever. And so, but yes, there are specifically two different kinds. 721 is typically more used for one-of-one items.
Okay. So like a lot of those things that you see on like OpenSea or like those apes
Probably.
And stuff like that, those are probably ERC 721s, right?
Yeah, art collectors typically only buy 721s because they view this as like the gold standard.
Is there a way to break down what an ERC 721 is just a little bit more, or is that just kind of the best?
I would say for this audience, it's probably just the best thing to stick with. If we want to do more of an advanced deep dive on the technicals and like why one would save gas and what like the 720, I think it's 721A is doing to also save gas in their mint process, then we could go into some of that. But let's skip it for this one.
Sweet. And then I just want to reiterate one more time. I don't know if we actually covered the definition of this, and this is a very simple definition, but just for everyone to reiterate, can you define what gas is?
Well, it's when you eat a certain...
We've all had it.
Sorry.
Everyone has probably, that's listening to this, it's in America, has probably had Taco Bell at some point.
Yes.
Sorry. So basically, gas is the fee that it costs to do a transaction. So kind of like, using gas in your car to get from one place or another or to another. Gas is the charge that we pay for a transaction to move across the blockchain. And there's a lot of different aspects that go into determining the price of gas. And that's things like we were saying earlier, it has to do with like network traffic, the type of network, just how things are like developed and designed. So the way that the network functions, is it proof of work, proof of stake? All of these different things are like fundamental parts of how the cost of gas is determined, and then that's what you pay in order to purchase or transact or trade NFTs and cryptocurrencies on the blockchain.
Nice. Thank you, Rachel.
I want to go a little further on that. Each blockchain typically has a native coin. And so this coin is the gas that chain uses. This is how you know what gas is. If you're on Ethereum, then it's Ethereum. If you're on Kronos, which is crypto.com's, then you are using CRO as gas, or Solana, you're using Sol as gas. And so typically chains that do charge gas, which is most of them, you will be using their coin to do that. And really the only difference between a coin and a token essentially is that one is a gas unit and one exists on a network in a smart contract.
Okay. So I think, this is something that is kind of around in the space. I've seen different types of NFT projects. I've heard of like profile picture like projects and stuff like that. Could you give us a little bit of insight in terms of what kind of NFT projects exist in the space and things to maybe look out for, maybe avoid, or otherwise just be aware of when you're traversing the space?
I think the thing that's kind of tough about that is that everybody's looking for something different. So it's hard to kind of warn against certain things because, maybe if you're an investor, you're trying to find NFTs that are going to increase in value. And if that's the case, then you'll want to stay away from, different kinds of projects. But, maybe you just want a cool picture. And in that case, there's a whole different set of criteria as far as what you're looking for. So it is a little difficult to try to warn someone away from something just because it doesn't fit into what they're wanting to find. But there are different types of product or project. So that is a different thing as well. Sorry. I don't know. That kind of I had a thought there.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, it really depends on what you're looking for. So, I mean, just the same way you're going out to look for a car. If you're looking for it in blue, that is a manual or automatic, that has some other specific feature that you're interested in, you're going to be ideally doing research, kind of knowing what the value is, thinking about negotiation of it. In this case, you're going to know it's a depreciating asset. But art is similar. And typically NFTs in today's world are art. There are other applications we're planning on coming out with that are really unique to this space. But when you're out there looking, you should do your research. You should always verify before you're just blindly trusting. And typically if something is in a very short time frame, you're either hearing about it really late and you don't have time to do research, or it's too good to be true, or it's a scam. So just be really careful in the space. Look to trusted people that may be in it, or do your research. Or do your research.
Yeah, I would say that one thing that is a really good note on that, kind of like what Richard was just saying, is be aware of FOMO, which is fear of missing out. It is something that is really easy to get caught up in this space, which is like maybe you stumble across something and you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be like the NFT. Everybody's talking about it. If I don't get this now, I'm going to miss the chance forever. And then people rush and they don't do their research. And I can't stress enough how rarely it actually is like your only opportunity to get something. There is always time to check to make sure what you're doing is safe, to make sure that your information and your data is protected, and to like slow down and take a beat before you put money into anything in this space. So, yeah. Yeah,
and check to see if their contract has been audited and by who. Read about who audited it and what it does. Read the audit. The space is very young. It's growing rapidly every day. New things happen every day. New scams happen every day. Some of the biggest projects have had issues, or their contract was written improperly, and maybe they had an audit, maybe they don't. Some auditors like Certic, they offer like a 21-day warranty on that cert to the company, but that's not much. So I would say that over time, as the space develops, you're going to be in a better spot. You could go to bigger retailers that have this, and not just in some sort of like side channel or some sort of spreadsheet, but again, do your research.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've seen profile picture projects and things where it's like programmatically generated art. I've seen those as well. There's a whole bunch of different things, and I think my favorite are like the one of ones that are created, where it's, it's just something like the original art, like just something that someone posted, and that's the only one that exists for it. So I think no matter what kind of projects.
I was going to say, I think that the next generation of questions that are going to be happening in the art world specifically are, did someone make it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, especially with like the DALL-E 6 thing. Yeah, the DALL-E2 project. I've seen some pretty amazing stuff with that. You can just ask for a hamster in a bathtub on the moon and you will get it. Yeah, today I searched
a bunch of them.
And you won't get arrested for it.
Yeah. I did a bunch of like kiwi as a fruit and as a bird. And it gave me a lot of really solid results to that are very funny, including a courtroom sketch of a kiwi bird versus a kiwi fruit. So, yeah.
That is, I really hope that maybe we'll include it as the cover art for this.
Absolutely. I have it, so I can share it. It's great.
You got to mint it as an NFT first, so that way it can make sense while we're using it as a...
I would. Yeah. Happily.
Yeah.
Awesome. We are inching towards the 30-minute mark for this, I believe. So honestly, this was a pleasure to be able to speak with all of you today. This has been Mr. Geis and Carla speaking with Richard and Rachel about NFTs. Do we have any closing notes, any farewells, goodbyes from anyone?
Just thank you guys so much for hosting. This has been absolutely wonderful, and we're looking forward to next time.
Awesome.
Also, I sent you that picture in the chat.
It is better than I was expecting, so that's nice.
Yeah, much
thank
better.
You guys. This is fantastic. I really enjoyed these conversations. I feel like I'm learning more, and I really hope those of you listening at home are also learning a lot too.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.